Hello, and welcome to class. Today it's beginning of week number 3, and we're going to be going over the assignments, the discussion post, as well as the paper that are going to be due in this particular week. Now, I may be pushing the envelope a little bit by getting this out there early before you even have any questions, but for those of you who should be starting to work on your paper, I thought it would be a good idea for you to have some more feedback and guidelines about what's expected there. So let's get right into it. Here's the week 3 assignment that's posted in Blackboard, and we're going to stick pretty close to the existing assignments with just a little bit more explanation. So first we'll take a look at the discussion. The discussion thread is going to be due by Wednesday as normal, your initial post, and we're going to be looking at the different eras of leadership that you've been reading about, and we're going to be examining how those approaches that have developed over time have evolved to be able to lead global organizations, and especially dealing with cultural challenges, cross borders, different cultures, and generational differences. Here we're talking about people coming from different generations. So for this discussion post, you should summarize the development of the management and leadership thinking. At this stage, we're not really distinguishing between management and leadership. Most of the previous work that's been done in the past 100 years has kind of looked at them as one and the same. And so what you're going to be doing is looking how the thinking about that, how the work that's been written up has evolved into our current thinking about leadership. Then you should choose a global organization as an example of how our current thinking about management and leadership are being utilized to run large multinational global organizations. Then you want to explain specifically how current management practices deal with cultural and generational differences. Okay? And again, we're looking for about 800 words, and this discussion post should fit very nicely into the paper that you're writing for week 3. So again, I think you should begin to look at these assignments in the class as being somewhat cumulative. In effect, they should link together, they should integrate and be complementary to each other as opposed to being totally separate things. You should see how they fit together, and the research that you're doing for your discussion post should lead into the writing that you do in your paper, and the research that you do on your paper should lead into your discussion post. So there should be a close connection between the two. Then the paper, which is going to be due on Sunday evening at midnight, we've talked about a little bit before in the week 2 assignments, because I wanted to give you a heads up about that and how you're going to be using the Wren textbook and how the eras there fit very nicely into the eras here. They just have different titles. So let's take a look at the requirements. The requirements say you have to write 12 to 15 pages. Well, I look at these as more or less a guideline and not really a hard and fast rule. If you have everything said in 11 pages, I don't need to see an extra page of filler. If you still have things to say and you've reached page 15, keep on writing. The thing you should note, though, of course, is these 12 to 15 pages do not include title pages, a page for an abstract, a reference list, or any appendices that you decide to include. Those are not counted in the 12 to 15 pages. You are to submit through Safe Assign Draft, review the results, and then make revisions as necessary, and then use Safe Assign Final. As for references, generally, at the DBA level, I recommend one scholarly peer-reviewed article per page. So if you are writing 15 pages, you should end up with 15 scholarly peer-reviewed journal references. And with the amount of background you guys have, that should not be a big problem. One of the things I would like to point out, though, is you should be sure and write a strong introduction. And this may actually be written after you've completed the rest of the paper. And the introduction should describe what the paper is going to be about, what the topic is. And don't assume just because we have the question laid out in the class that the reader would know. You could be able to send this to somebody else who has no idea even what the class is about, and the introduction should explain what your paper is about and what the topic is about. And it should also explain why you've written it, what the justification is, why it's important. And finally, the introduction should include how you plan to approach the paper, so that as the reader gets into it, they should have it pretty much laid out what you're going to look at first. Are you going to review some of the literature? Are you going to define some of the terms? Are you going to then go into some illustrations and examples? But how is the paper going to be laid out? Okay, so whenever I review your papers, I'm always looking for a solid introduction, and then as I read through the body of the paper, I go back and I see, well, this is what they said they were going to do in the introduction. Is that what they actually did? So I kind of compare what the introduction says to the body of the paper and your conclusions. And so that's why I say you might want to think about writing the final version of the introduction after you finish the paper, and you can more completely describe what the paper is going to be about. Organization of the paper should be laid out in sections. Whenever we get longer than a page or two, it's difficult for the reader to follow unless you have it broken down with headings into separate sections. So look for good organization. The style used should be the scholarly writing style. It's described in the Grows Writing Studio, and as well as I've described in the scholarly writing video presentation that's available in Start Here. Your paper should have conclusions, and I'd like to point this out because I think there might be a little bit of confusion the way the assignment is written. This is not simply a literature review. This is using literature to describe to the reader the various phases or eras of management and leadership thinking development, but you should be doing the linking together. It's not simply saying this one said this paper said this guy said this woman said this. It's really you using that information from the literature review, from the literature, to then come up with your conclusions about how this evolution has occurred and why we ended up where we are now based upon what's come before. Okay? So this is more about your analysis than simply reviewing all the literature that's been written about leadership over the past 100 years. Okay? And as Yoda says, do or do not. There is no try. So, the keys to success for week number 3. Now we're getting into the class. So far we've had some very good discussions, and now we're ready to apply it to a more serious effort in the paper. So the first thing is you want to get started early. You want to start writing and get your ideas down and your research done as early as possible. Remember, as we come into the final stretch of the paper, you need to have time for revising and proofreading and editing, and maybe trying to find somebody else to take a look at your paper, and then rewriting, and then revising and proofreading again. The best writers look at several cycles of revising and writing and proofreading and revising before they get it right. So that all takes time. Start early. As I've mentioned several times, use outside references from the academic journals that are available in the online library. Refer to the theory that you're describing by describing it. Okay, so if you're talking about scientific management, don't assume that the reader knows what that is. You have to describe what it is. You have to explain the origin, what came before it, and why it became important. Then apply it to a particular situation. Make sure that the reader can understand why it would apply and work in the period of time that it was originated. Use specific examples as illustrations of the theories in action. So look for either own experience or things, companies that you've read about, illustrations of how these theories might apply. And then this is the first chance to really demonstrate your full analysis and thinking about a larger subject. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is not a literature review. This is actually a demonstration of how you put things together, your analysis, and also some creative thinking, original thought on your part. If you're unsure about all the pieces that need to go into the paper, go back and look at the paper rubric. There's a video on that to make sure that you're going to cover all the categories sufficiently. And when you are finished, send it in to me. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And I will end up with showing you a scene off the English coastline.